Thanks so much for still being here in the mid-afternoon slot. We're really pleased to bring you a panel discussion about skills. Sarah's already introduced me. I am not going to introduce the panel. They're going to introduce themselves, and they're going to kick off with our first question, particularly interesting in light of some of the skills that people said they're using for their collections data work. So the question to introduce yourself with is, what skill do you think is underrated for working with collections data? And we're going in alphabetical order, starting with Anna Maria.
Fantastic. Thanks, Liz. Great to be here today. Thank you. So I'm Anna Maria Sichani. I'm currently a postdoc research associate in digital humanities at School of Advanced Study at the Digital Humanities Research Hub. I'm currently collaborating with the Congruence Engine as a TANK-funded project, and I'm about to embark on a great fellowship to look at embedding responsible AI literacy skills across the cultural heritage sector, including professionals and researchers. So my background is in media history and digital humanities. I'm an active researcher. I'm here to bring the researcher perspective, and I'm excited to joining this panel today to bring, as I said, the voice of the researcher, working in close collaboration with professionals, sharing the same concerns around data and skills. And I think one of the underrated skills while working with collections data for me is the critical thinking, the critical awareness that we should have towards the data itself, but also the standards, the tools, the systems, and also the processes that we are following. That's for me.
Perfect. Livi, you're next.
Hello, my name's Livi. I'm a freelance e-Curator, and with a specialism in digital engagement, I primarily promote accessible practices within the museum sector. I'm currently working with the Museum Association as part of their working group for the Code of Ethics review. I'm also a master's scholar at the University of Leicester studying socially engaged practices in museums and art galleries, and I'm a committee member of the Museum Computer Group. One of the key underrated skills that I think we desperately need within the sector is being able to understand how accessible technologies work and how we might be able to embed them within our data set so that we can work smart rather than hard. Because if we're using the right metadata, the right alt text, we can then easily make every single one of our galleries, our social media instantly accessible, instantly disability friendly. And once that becomes a priority, we have achieved our goal of making museums accessible for all.
Brilliant. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah. I'm the Museum Development Programme Manager for the Arts Council England, and I have the lovely job of working with our 5 museum development areas across England who are funded by Arts Council to support museums in a variety of ways. But one of the ways we do that, one of the big ways, is through a skills development programme, which is basically training. And data is always threaded throughout the programme. Usually it's been quite implicit until now. It's kind of following in the footsteps of digital a few years ago. Now it's really becoming explicit in terms of people wanting to explore data skills. Even this conference and its title, it really is a time to be focusing on that. So it's really exciting to be here today and just to geek out about collections data. We don't get much time to do that, so that's nice. In terms of underrated skills, I wanted to kind of raise the flag of how brilliant the data skills already are, I think, in collections staff already. So in that Mentimeter Sarah posted, eye for detail was out there quite a lot. That might sound really basic, as like, well, yeah, eye for detail is a skill, but any work you do around data, we know you get out what you put in, and that methodology that collections teams bring, I think, is parallel to none across the wider museum sector. So if you get out what you put in, we put in love, and you get out love, and as a result, the data that we have is really rich, and we're already seeing from today the incredible ways it's being used. So just to kind of say, I think collections are already ahead of the game in this. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but some really great skills, and that's really clear throughout everything we've heard today.
Thank you, everyone. My personal underrated skill is definitely pattern recognition. Just remembering that this one time 5 years ago, I'm sure I saw that somewhere else, is just so unparalleled in problem solving in our data work. So I think that's my top one. Just to explain to everyone who's joined, who's here this afternoon, how this session is going to work. So we have prepared two very relevant questions when we're thinking about the context of everything today, and we're going to talk around those, but we will have a bit of time after those to answer questions that people might have about skills as well. So do put your questions in the Q&A. I will be monitoring for those when we get a bit further into the session, and I can see there are a couple in there already. So please put your questions in the Q&A. So our first question that we have been thinking about really came through in sort of most of the sessions today, but kind of underlies all of this work, I think, is what skills do we need to make sure we're using and improving our data responsibly and ethically? And I'm going to pass over to Livi to open for us.
Well, I think this is probably the most important question of all, because if we can't use our data in a responsible manner, then we're doing a disservice to everyone, including the people that originally made those collections. I think it's important that we have transparency and accountability in every aspect of going forward, whether it's the fact that we have a collector who has very dubious past and has biases against Black people. I think racism should be something that's highlighted within our collections as a method of being anti-racist and being transparent. I also think it's important that we understand that our collections are inherently biased because of the foundations of our museums. We can't help the fact that we've inherited this, but it is our responsibility to do something about it. And it involves making sure that the right people are in the room and that they are appropriately compensated for their time, effort, and expertise, and it's recognised.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. We've not talked much today about that who's in the room question, but it really underpins all of the questions about using our data and what we're using it for. Anna Maria, you're going to come in also on this question.
Yes, sorry, I wasn't expecting such a sunny afternoon. Blinds all over my face. Yes, I think that what Livi just mentioned is such a great answer, but I just want to focus actually on something that it comes up very often when I'm creating and I'm using cultural heritage data. So I think that is, especially in the light of the data-driven, development that AI is putting in front of us right now, I think that it's really important for us to be able to, what we're saying, like provide bulletproof documentation for our data sets. So, and create documentation with care and respect towards like the data that we create and that we curate as well. And I think that it's really important to do so because we need to understand the various often hidden layers of documentation that our data has, but also I think it's really important for us to, to focus on the documentation that we are now creating for the data set or the documentation that we are enriching. And in order to do so with care and respect, I think it's really important to collaborate or to kind of enrich the collaborations that we are working, the collaborators that we're working with, and to ask them and to hear them about their specific needs. Because, for example, the data sets that are now used for training machine learning data models, even the bespoke ones that we're using in the cultural heritage world, they have specific documentation needs. So, for example, through the data cards or the data sets, I think it's really important to provide documentation that, give to the data set the context, as Livi mentioned, the transparent information on provenance, on composition history, or for example, if it's an annotated data set, on the annotation process, on the biases that are reflected there. I think, the more we care and the more we show our care towards the documentation of the data sets that we're using and that we curated, the better uses we will ensure for the data sets. And another aspect that I want to actually underline for, as a skill that will ensure the ethical use of our data, I think it's how important it is for us to also acknowledge our own positionality when we are working with data or with the tools that we're working, or with the systems that we're employed, and even like the standards that we're using, they have like a baggage in them. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge this, throughout the life cycle, let's say, of the data that we're using.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Sarah, do you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, just quickly kind of taking up on some of Anna's points there about documentation. I think from an organisational perspective, thinking about the museums themselves and their responsibility, to have robust data takes capacity, it takes resource, and that has obviously been something that's been threaded throughout today and very clear in people's responses about the challenges. So I think organisations have a responsibility to understand what that actually means. So to know, for example, even something such as simple as kind of collections records, location information, that kind of data, the expectation to have that as a full, complete data set needs to be reflected in the resources attached to that from an organizational level. And that obviously links into ethics too, to be able to understand those biases and that really nuanced information where the real value is. We need time and we need space and money, and that comes into organizational buy-in, which I will talk about a bit in a minute, but I think that's really important.
It's interesting here because there's a sort of underlying subtext here of that a lot of what we've been talking about today is more data, doing more things in more ways. But is that in conflict with the idea of care and slowness and understanding? And I think that that's coming up in a lot of areas in the sector, not just with data, but also when we're thinking about co-production and working with communities. And I think there's a real need for improved advocacy skills across the board, partly to answer one of the things that had just come up in the Q&A that Livi had answered around organizations aren't all ready for that conversation about paying community contributors. And that advocacy in that, I think, is really important. Livi, you've got your hand up.
I also wanted to add in that it's important to involve the communities that we're serving within the decision-making process from the very beginning, not after we put in the bid application for grants, saying that we're going to be involving the communities. It's important to have them there when we're writing the bids. It's important to have them there when we're deciding what is and what isn't important within our collections. They should be involved in our collections policies. They should be involved in our disposal policies. They should be involved in what we say and how we say it when we're doing our exhibitions. How do they get decided? Who is the people that are in the decision? What is the decision-making process? Because until we have a correct process that will align with what our sector ambitions are, which is to be for the people, by the people, not from this top down, we know best, we need to tell you what the histories are. We need to completely spin it on its head. We're supposed to be just there to facilitate the communities growing and learning. As far as I'm concerned, as a curator, I should be having the most boring job ever and just doing all of the entering things in so that everyone else can go and be excited about being able to do things with the data that we've collected.
I think this brings us on to our second question, really, because the second question that we have thought about is how can our collections data skills be used across museum and heritage work? But really what we're saying is, how is everyone's skills actually the same, and how can we all be doing the best that we can to use them in the most responsible and ethical ways? So Sarah, it's a slightly different question, but really it's the same question.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about how we move forward with this then, and as I said at the start, I think collections, staff and teams are really the groups that have had the longest standing relationship with data in the museum organization. Obviously, data exists elsewhere in audiences and other elements, but in terms of the care and the attention that collections focuses on data, there's a huge wealth of experience within our teams in there. So if you think about a museum object coming in and its whole life cycle in the organization and all the data sets, even condition reporting and everything that goes with it, people there have really great skills that they can use. But what the challenge is there, I think, is does the organization line up with that? So we've heard some golden threads today around ethics, kind of accessibility and accuracy of data, and it is a learning resource. And it's clear everyone within this kind of digital room has a very similar outlook of the capabilities of data and what you need to get there. But actually, if everyone just kind of sense checks in their own organization now of, does that feel aligned to how my organization approaches data, not collections data, just data, the ethics around that? Does that feel about the same? Does it feel about the same in terms of what they think about collecting data and accuracy? Does that, replicated what's happening in the audiences department? I say department, you might be a team of one, but, when you're putting on your different hat, are you using the same skills in the same way? Because actually, if it doesn't feel the same aligned, that's where you're going to come against issues of this work feeling siloed or project-based versus kind of being embedded in what we do. And for me, the solution, it's sort of the same as Livi's, but in a different framing, is you need to have an organization-wide approach. You need an organization-wide data strategy of which collections is a strand. So you need to have a way that you go about collecting your data in an ethical framework. You need that architecture in place so the collections work slots into that, with an understanding that collections has some specific needs. So responsible data collection generally, you only ask for the data you need, but collections, we're a hungry bunch. We want all the information. We never want it to stop coming in almost. We want to continue to learn about the objects that we have. So there are some specific elements that need to be considered, but it should be part of that overarching strategy that the organization takes responsibility for. And really, I think everyone that's here today has the opportunity to feed in their expertise into that, because we probably do come with some of the deepest expertise about how to shape that organization-wide strategy so that this work continues to roll and is embedded. And therefore, if you want the resources and the other challenges that we had at the time, you need it in strategies to kind of make the case and the argument of this is why we need that staff capacity. This is why we need to go for that funding. It has to come within that whole framework of a strategy rather than just a project.
Livi or Anna Maria, do you want to come in and add to that?
Yes, I can't agree more actually with Sarah. I think the collections data professionals are, in my eyes, are like the Swiss Army knife of institutions. So they're doing pretty much everything. They're capable to do pretty much everything. So we've conducted a survey and a set of interviews through McAward-White engine colleagues, Aaron Rees and Daniel Baltecki, just to, map, what's out there in terms of like skills and capacity on the collections management task force currently in the UK. And what we actually got is what we expected, actually, that data collection professionals, they're not only carrying this multi-layered set of skills and knowledge, but actually they're undertaking so many roles and tasks that normally, they fall beyond, the John Bremy. They're doing not only documentation and collection management and curation, they also do, because they bring this very valuable and very rare technical expertise, like in-house technical expertise, so they can deal with from systems admin to, let's say, troubleshooting. Like they can do pretty much everything. They have this accuracy, this eye for accuracy. So they're tested for adaptability and continuous learning. They can be very flexible in new systems and processes. So I think that, there is this capital of knowledge there that, as Sarah and Livi said, I think that we should care for them more, and also we should advocate for more strategic investment, actually, in not only in the development of the existing task force, but also for enlarge and enrich the synergies in this direction with other disciplines, with other sectors as well. So, the collection professionals, I think that they kind of deserve to have not only more resources, but also the power to take advantage of all this.
Absolutely. And that's also come through in the chat in a comment about the need for funders to kind of think about what this kind of approach might mean. I want to pick up slightly on what we're talking about with a question from the Q&A. And I'm sort of summarizing the question a little bit, is that if we are all trying to be the Swiss Army knife of people, does this risk alienating people who are might be in these roles or other roles who maybe are less tech savvy or have less organizational opportunity to be tech savvy? I think that's something also, it could be individual and organizational. How can we kind of find our path through this? Who'd like to come in? Just unmute whoever wants to go first.
Can I jump in on this one? I was actually going to bring up about the fact that, we definitely are jacks of all trades. We kind of have to be, because we've got very little funding and we have to make it do miracles, essentially. I'm sure we're all sitting here being like, how did we get this done? Especially when it comes towards exhibition handovers, being able to move on. It's a lot. But the question is, where is this pressure coming from? Is it coming from ourselves because we care and we care about our communities and we want to make sure that we are doing the best job for our organizations and for our communities? Or is it coming from the organizations itself? I don't think it's possible for us to have every single skill possible. But I do think it's possible to network and work together in a collaborative fashion. It's good to have a good idea of roughly everything. The jack of all trades, master of none, but is better than a master of one, I believe is the term, which means that you can then communicate with pretty much anyone. But that doesn't mean that you're the best person to do everything. And it's knowing when to delegate, when you need to do something, and when you need to ask for help and who to ask help from. And it might be another member of staff, but it might also be a volunteer who's been there since before you were born and knows everything about this one particular part of the collection that, you know, if you spent years researching, you would never get a fraction of their knowledge. Knowing when and how you can use every aspect of your resources and how to bring them in, that's probably going to be a more sustainable way of doing it, and you get a better community feel than you would trying to keep up with all of the things. Just follow your interests and you will find your path. Sounds really cheesy, but we can't do everything and we can't be everything.
Do you mind if I come in on that as well, Louise? Yeah, just to kind of respond to Livi, I completely agree. And I like the idea of being a Swiss Army knife. I think that's going to be my new phrase for myself. I think that with data, the way it's sometimes talked about is a new field. It's absolutely not new. There's just some emerging new technologies. So I think if there is some anxiety out there around kind of feeling left behind, I think it does feel to me very similar to where we were at with digital 8 years ago, where there was almost this, oh my God, we need to get someone in who's 18, otherwise we won't use social media. And then actually, once that kind of initial, there's this new tool kind of calms down and it just becomes part of our everyday life beyond just our jobs and museum sector. I think some of these new data tools, and you can even see, I think Sarah mentioned about using ChatGPT in her own personal life, they just slowly permeate. And obviously there are going to be forerunners in the museum sector that are using really incredible technology. I mean, some of the presentations today, I was like, I only understand half of those words, but that's fine because there are always going to be those that are pushing forward at the practice. And the big bulk of the sector actually will still be focusing on their current practice, but maybe using tools like Kevin's been showing us about the data service. There are absolutely these sector-wide pieces of work going on that can support all of us. So it's not about us all jumping onto this kind of shiny new data bandwagon, because we're already doing it. We're already great at it. Us four have agreed that. So it's about kind of finding the right bit, as Livi says, that works for your organization. Have a strategy and then do the next thing on the strategy rather than trying to rush to the end.
I want to ask another question from the Q&A, slightly different to how it's been phrased. Again, sorry, but thank you to the person who asked it. This is going to be a quick fire question because it's our last one before our closing. So if you're just coming into the sector now, imagine you are just coming into the sector, you want to develop your skills to work in documentation, data collections management, or whatever of those phrases you want to call it. What would you focus on? What would you advise someone focus on? And I'm going to pick on you in order, starting with Livi.
I would focus on where your natural talents lie, because every single person here, whether they're a panelist or they're a delegate, has something unique about them. And the museum sector is one of the most diverse content sectors that I've ever known. So if you're able to find what you can do that no one else can, like it might be a case of like your pattern recognition for specific kinds of fabric is unreal. Like that is a skill that you should develop, and also know the skills outside of that that you can accompany that. So it might be, okay, I need to understand about thread counts. How is data surrounding fabrics used? It might be a case that you are really good at drawing and we need more graphic designers. We need that personal touch added to our collections databases as well, whether it's linking our exhibition data to our collection database so that we can continuously update that, because we don't have a photo yet that's done professionally of the object, but we have a really good drawing that's been done. Whatever it is that your heart desires that you can bring that no one else can, that's the path that you should go on.
All right. And a quick answer from Anna Maria.
Yeah, just gonna support what Livi said. I think that, yeah, the best advice for me is also to follow your talents. So if you feel more confident with, let's say, the technical stuff, so yes, there is place definitely for you in, let's say, suggesting, using, or also developing also the systems that we're using. If you're more keen on, let's say, creating documentation and developing narratives around objects, there is definitely a place for you there. So invest actually on, where you feel that you have more things to contribute, because this is where you're going to shine actually.
And Sarah, speedy answer from you.
Okay, assuming the context of this question is you want to work in collections, my advice would be get down and dirty with collections, in that you can only really understand why it's so important to have one unique, number identifier of that single sewing machine when you're in the stores and there's 10 more and you think, Jesus, how do I, navigate this? And seeing the applicability of the real life data, what that actually does for museums, how you can then connect it to the users, that's going to help you understand the whole picture. And that's really what's important to you find your path within it.
Fabulous. Thank you, everyone. We have our last closing question. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. This probably means we're going to overrun by like 1 to 2 minutes. So I apologize to Sarah in advance. So our final question is putting it back on organizations instead of individuals. So what can organizations do to get the best talent into collections data roles? And I'll start with Sarah.
Okay, I'm going to stuck record it. I think it needs to be in their strategy, whether that's workforce or data strategy, whatever that looks like. It needs to go from the top down, an understanding of what skills we need in our organization to deliver what we want to deliver, and then recruit accordingly to that. I know that oversimplifies quite a long process, but it has to be built in. Otherwise, it's just luck that you get the right skill versus, intent.
And Anna Maria?
I think I would suggest to create roles and roles descriptions, and not so much defining the skill set per se, but describing more of someone who is keen to learn, keen to explore, to experiment, and just be ready to be impressed by new talent.
Fabulous. And Livi, closing with you.
For me, I think the most important thing that museums can do is making sure that their recruitment practices are flexible. So whether it's sending out the questions for interview beforehand, providing feedback, curating for change, provide some really great guidance on how to do this so that you can get more diverse talent, whether you're neurodivergent, disabled, or able-bodied. Being able to adapt your recruitment practices so that they are accessible makes it accessible for everyone.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, everyone. That was an extremely speedy panel. There's some really interesting stuff in the chat, especially I think for Sarah with your museum development hat on. There's some interesting regional discussion and some principles that come up very often in these kinds of conversations around projects and funding and everything like that. So thank you very much to all of my panel.